But also there's a lot of subtle other activities that companies can do to measure and kind of strive for a holistic impact strategy and impact activities, if you will.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Sustainability Leader Show, your go-to podcast for actionable insights from top sustainability leaders worldwide. I'm Jonas, co-founder of TSC, and I'm hosting today's episode. The purpose of this podcast is to share the stories from those actually leading sustainability efforts in organizations around the world. In each episode, we uncover unique insights, lessons learned, and practical advice to help you drive sustainability in your organization. And this podcast is brought to you by the Sustainability Circle, the platform for community-powered career growth for leaders in corporate sustainability. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Dr. Rawaa Ammar, environmental scientist and the Chief Sustainability and Impact Officer at Resortecs, a Belgian startup leading the way in circularity within the textile industry. Together, we will explore how today's ESG frameworks relate to the concept of doing less harm, why that might not be enough, and how the reality of innovative and impact-driven companies fits or does not fit these standards. Rawaa, it's good to have you on the show.
Thanks, Jonas, for having me. It's great to be here and discuss this very important topic.
Then let's jump right in to set the stage. Could you share a bit about your journey into the field of sustainability, how you came to hold the position of Chief Sustainability and Impact Officer at Resortecs?
Yeah, I think my journey with sustainability started really at childhood. The way I was raised in a small village with being lucky with grandparents and parents that were very eco-conscious about sources and resources. And we were very close to nature. Then I had my time as a scout girl, which gave me this appreciation and cherishing for the nature and dictated what I would like to study later in life. So I did science and I did my PhD in environmental science, specifically in the impact of anthropogenic activities on water, soil, and air. And then I followed up this with research to try to understand how the nature, how the planet is doing a natural withdrawal of excess CO2. So, if you will, it was natural decarbonization by the ocean from the atmosphere. And it was a very exciting time in academia to understand all that, but I felt that I need to do something more for the planet, something more tangible. So I wanted to have my capacities and skills in something where I can have a more quick impact that is tangible, that I can contribute to find a solution that can be applicable. And that's how life led me to Resortecs, and I took the position of Chief Sustainability and Impact Officer. So I'm coming from a hardcore sustainability background to this position.
Yeah. And now most are probably not familiar with what Resortecs does. Can you tell us a bit more about the company and also what your role is within the company?
Yes, so Resortecs is recycling sorting technology. That's what the name stands for. And we have developed an eco-design solution based on the concept of design for disassembly to solve the problem of, or the big problem of textile industry. It sometimes goes unnoticed how polluting the textile industry is. It comes as the fourth most polluting industry in the world. It contributes to 10% of global CO2 emissions, and it is responsible for 20% of water pollution. It's a very high demand in terms of resources. When it comes to water, land, and material, it comes in the third sector, if you will. So it's a huge sector that has a big impact, and a big part of the impact is because of the overproduction and the huge waste generation. Resortecs wanted to tackle this problem heads on, but we didn't want to tackle it at the very end where we have to handle the waste, and we want to rethink the production already at the design phase at the set start. So what we developed is a solution that we can involve at the design, which is represented by what we call Smart Stitch, which is a stitching thread that is designed to disappear under specific heat. So we can design the garment or any textile product to that matter with this stitch. Nothing needs to be changed to the manufacturing process or the durability of the product. Product can be washed, dried, even ironed throughout its use phase. And when we need it to be disassembled, when it's out of use and we need it to be disassembled, we have developed a system called Smart Disassembly. Why smart? Because it applies heat that only triggers the smart stitch, causing it to melt, and everything that was associated together, like the different fabrics, the different materials, what we call recycling disruptors, will fall apart and get automatically sorted. And therefore, what we will get out is fine fabric of high quality, ready for repair, remake, and recycling. So just to put it in a context, let's say at home, when we have a package, food package made of paper and maybe a nylon fill, and we went to sort it out for recycling at home, we cannot put it in the same bin. We have to remove the two parts and put each one in a different bag. But it's the same with clothes. However, everything is stitched together. And this solution is to unstitch the different parts and make it ready for recycling with high efficiency.
Yeah. Really fascinating stuff. I have to admit, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole when we first got to know each other, and I checked out Resortecs, and it's a whole world to dive into. Also, I have to say, pretty sleek looking website and team, but that probably comes with the closeness to the fashion industry, I would guess. And maybe because we just briefly touched upon it, what's your role in all of this?
So I joined Resortecs as one of the founding members early in 2019, and I was number 3 in the company back then. And now we are a proud team of more than 8 nationalities, all here in Brussels. I take the role of sustainability and impact. And I know it's not a very common title, but I was insisting on having the 2 words in the title because they are different. They are not synonym to each other. And what does that mean? It means that I have to work on the sustainability strategy, link it to our KPIs, link it to our business plan, direct our mission, have all the policies and governance internally linked to this kind of a mission that we are having. So basically to be the eco-conscious compass, if you will, in the company, to make sure all our activities are aligned with our values and to valorize how we can transform this sustainability and impact efforts into a sustainable business development, and how we can still generate profit and generate value for the customers while still being a responsible company, but not stopping at being responsible company, but rather generate an impact and try to be part of the solution towards a better future. So link that with the investors, link that with the end consumers, and of course with the raising awareness of the public, of the citizen. So all of these different activities goes under my umbrella of tasks.
Yeah. And I think it's a pretty smooth transition also to the conversation that we are planning today and the topic that this episode is a bit centered around when we think of the worlds of sustainability and impact. And we had this conversation recently where you mentioned doing less harm is not enough, which kind of sparked the idea for this episode. And can you maybe elaborate a bit what this means for you personally, but also in practice for companies, and especially for impact-focused companies like Resortecs is one?
Yeah, sure. I thought a lot about it. This idea of doing less harm is not enough. If you are as an individual, if you don't steal or you don't lie, you're not doing harm. Is it that enough to be considered as a good person? Maybe yes, but is it enough to get the title as a good person in a society? Maybe you need to be a little bit more, do more, give more to the society to do good. And it's the same, that could be the same logic could be applying to the companies. So the way I see in the companies, in the realm of sustainability and impact driven companies specifically, is if you imagine an axis line, yeah, where you have a line that goes between a company doing harm and a company that is doing good, positive impact, right? And then most of the companies, especially the linear business models that we have, they are on the very negative bar, on the extreme left of this bar. And what they are trying to do with their ESG policies, so environmental, social, and governance policies, is to do less harm. So to bring this, if you will, the knob a little bit towards a zero emission. And so like this, we are doing less harm, which is great on its own. But is it enough to our planet? That's the question. I read just this morning an article in Bloomberg that it's expected that the temperature will rise to 3 degrees more. We had a deal about 1.5 degrees in Paris Agreement. We are doubling that. So is that enough just to do less harm, to keep the temperature down? I believe not. So what we need is to move the cursor further to the right, where we start doing a positive impact and not just stop at doing less harm.
Yeah, super interesting. And I mean, we had the discussion before we started the recording, right? For anyone listening, we're recording on November 6th. As it looks, Donald Trump is taking over the White House again. And we all know what that might mean for sustainability regulation and the focus of companies in the future. So it's even more important, in my opinion, that companies that are on this track of actually driving impact double down on their strategies and on their missions. So really cool to see that these companies exist and the people in the companies that drive this as well. So maybe to put this in perspective of the big picture, how the big companies also think of the topic sustainability or ESG, how you put it as well, which is somewhat synonymous, especially in the corporate context, I would say. How do you perceive these ESG frameworks in relation to positive impact being achieved? And then also, what are the limitations of those frameworks, especially when it comes to companies like Resortecs, an impact-driven company that might not fit the rules of such a framework?
Yes, that's a very important point to be raised, because there are plenty of frameworks out there to suggest how to deal or monitor or measure ESG KPIs or metrics. So we can think about starting from a European lens, Fit for 55, or the CSRD, or the different certifications that are required, the environmental management systems, the GRI reporting, which is an international one on reporting on ESG requirements. If you go on a Yahoo Finance page, you will find ESG for certain companies, and there will be scoring for those companies. And I find it sometimes misleading, because some companies maybe do a lot of effort on the S or the G, but very little on the environment, or even do a lot of harm on the environment, but this is not reflected properly on the score together. And this international frameworks that are used for ESG, they are one size, but one size doesn't fit all, because the different companies don't have the same practices, they don't have the same business models, they don't have the same age or capacity or resources to do things. So it is good, but it's not one size fit all, because companies that are impact driven, like startups that either create social impact or environmental impact, they are measured toward something where scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 are very clarified and defined, which is fine, which is much needed. I'm not discrediting the way it's done. What I'm saying is that it's not fair to have the same system applied for all sizes of companies, because then all the impact that is done by these companies, depending on their mission and industry, will not be accounted for in this framework. And then when you look into scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, they don't have control on it because of their size, because of their financial situation. And then a lot of those companies buy carbon credits, which I have very mixed feeling about buying carbon credits and how efficient it is and how true it is, but just to write it off the bill, if you will, from the environmental balance sheet of those companies. And the other companies who are really trying to do something good, they cannot have the financial means to perform the same activities to reduce on scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, while they generate other social and environmental impact that is not accounted for in those kind of metrics.
Mm. Yeah, and I think when it comes to the carbon credits, also heavily is dependent on what kind of a business model is this company, what other levers does the company have, and very importantly, what type of credits are they actually buying and where. But that's probably a story for a whole nother episode.
Yes.
I think there's definitely a lot of positive sides to the carbon markets, but it needs to be very transparent and very well regulated as well. All right. So, I mean, you briefly touched on the challenges as well that come with these standards and having to follow them as a small company, right? You mentioned like not having the market power to actually go to all of you, or the financial power to go to all of your suppliers to actually check at the location of your suppliers in third market countries, etc. So, are these the top challenges you would say that come for you at Resortecs?
I think this is part of the challenges, yes, which is some parts related to logistics, finance, or just simply resources to perform that. Also, to aligning with the company strategy as well and priorities. If we have a startup is a very hectic business environment, so you have so many things to do with really limited resources and a small budget, and you have a priority list. So before going to those things that will cost a lot of money and need a lot of resources, you prefer to do other things. So sometimes this is just a prioritization of the activities. That was a big challenge as well, because then what you will do, you have your startup. Most of startups are still also working on their R&D or the market analysis, where they need to put a lot of effort to increase the sale, to build a name, to work on their communication when it comes to impact. So those takes priority over the classical ESG requirement that is not necessarily required by law or by regulation, let's say, for small company sizes. But some investors are requesting those information from the investees. And then your score is really low. So I had a discussion with one of our investors, and they said, yeah, but we do a lot. And in their portfolio, when we took another types of impact KPIs that we measure and report on, we are very much advanced compared to the other companies in their portfolio. But then if we use this one size fit all assessment method based on the ESG, we score low. And he was surprised that if you score low, then all our companies in the portfolio will score even lower. So this is the challenge with, especially for impact investors, classical impact investors versus VC investors, because the VC investors, they invest in different sizes and types of companies, which some of them could abide these requirements while others don't. And then comparing companies will be inequitable. It will be a little bit unfair.
And I think you're in a very unique position as well now that we're transitioning to this reporting and metric side of it all, because I checked it out, and Resortecs is a VC-funded company that has both traditional venture capital companies, but also impact-focused venture capital companies, and as well has also received public grants from the EU in the EIC Horizon program, which I know quite well myself. All of those public grants often come with extensive reporting requirements that, again, bring in a different viewpoint, etc. So how do you reconcile all of these varying expectations while at the same time staying true to your mission? And maybe to add on that, how does that then also like translate to the metrics that need to be set up, etc.?
Yeah, this is a great question that explains my work in the last 3 years. And I think it was a journey that I was learning from as we go. So I can only share my experience, and I hope that could inspire best practices somehow. So at the beginning, I was trying to understand the requirement of each. So we have the classical venture capitals where I know what they would request every year from us to fill. And then we have our impact investors, which also they have their own KPIs to report on. And then we have our own strategy. That's my job, to build our own strategy. And I don't want to build our strategy based on the expectations of our investor, because I want to build it based on our values, core values, on our mission, and what we want to do at the end of the day. So for impact, I started from the theory of change to lay out our impact strategy, what is important for us and what we need to do. And then I coupled that with a double materiality test. This double materiality assessment, if you will, kind of laid out everything about our values, what we want to do in terms of business and impact, what are the things that we can control, at least in the short midterm, that we can really measure and report on, because we can be ambitious, but then we cannot do report nothing on that. So we want something more tangible that we can really have a control on. Coupling those two, I was able to do, aligned with our management, to create this double materiality test where we have a couple of things that we focus on and then translate those into outcomes and activities, linking it to our business plan and KPIs. So that was the first big exercise to do. Second one is to present this strategy to our stakeholders and try to agree on them to, like, is that fitting somewhere to what you're expecting from us? Is there something missing? Do you agree with that? And then just tweaking it on the way. And from there, I was able to create an internal policy, an internal guideline for the employees, which will be, I call it our impact and sustainability holy grail, so they can understand why we are doing, why each activity, why each communication, why each commute to the office matters, and how we can do better in all of that. So dividing it, how we can do less harm, and what are the activities that we can do positive impact, and then measuring that on monthly basis, quarterly basis, and how to report that to the stakeholders and to the general public with full transparency. So I'm in this journey now, while kind of put all of these things together. And then, because of we are impact driven company, the policy is an overarching policy, but then reporting on ESG is different than reporting on impact. So I had to do two different reports, where one is taking from really the angle of how we can do less harm and how we can target to become zero emission and by when, and the impact, how we are doing positive impact. And here I would really like to highlight this, because there's a lot of companies out there, and impact driven companies, ecopreneurs and front runners of clean tech, that sometimes the impact doesn't go into their impact balance sheet. I cannot claim that the CO2 reductions we are doing to the fashion industry will go into the balance sheet of Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 of Resortecs, because it will go for brands and recyclers. We are putting it completely out there for the industry, so we don't get any benefit from that, but we are enabling that, and how we can measure that. So it's like kind of altruistic kind of activity, the impact, where rather the ESG is something that we really can control, we really can reduce.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and it relates to basically what you said in the beginning, that there needs to be like a different type of metric how to measure exactly that, right? Your impact not being on your balance sheet, so to speak, or maybe your impact being so far in the future that it's really hard to put in some form of reporting, because the scopes are usually, you know, on an annual basis or maybe a 5-year scope, I would guess. So what other things do you basically then communicate to, let's say, the more impact focused stakeholders? Because I think we're pretty clear on what the more classic stakeholders want to know. So what do the impact driven investors or the impact driven stakeholders specifically look for?
So for the impact investors or impact stakeholders, they look for how much we can reduce CO2 for the whole industry. And that can be calculated. Indeed, it could be calculated in the same manner as ESG. So it can be done for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, a time. But also there's a lot of subtle other activities that companies can do to measure and kind of strive for a holistic impact strategy and impact activities, if you will. So that's why I like the framework of ESG, so environmental, social, and governance, because if you want to have a sustainable future, that cannot be there's no trade, shouldn't be a trade-off on the social part. And if you have equitable and respectful social activity, this cannot be done without an ethical governance part. So they should be linked to each other, and there will be more control on governance and social sometimes than the environmental, or at least it can be achieved at a shorter time. So it's very important for us as a company, and that's what we communicated with our impact investor, and they received it very well, that, for example, inclusive and equity and equality are important in our DNA, that we actively look to establish those, we monitor those, we try to correct proper representation and diversity and inclusion. We took a part of raising awareness as well. The raising awareness could be for end consumers, obviously, because everybody needs to be part of the solution, to business partners, to the industry peers, and also to the policymakers, especially for those companies that have peculiar point that they cannot be represented with the big lobbying companies that are classical linear system that have a lot of resources and weight and power to bring their ideas forward. So companies with our impact-driven companies, they need to voice what they are trying to do. They need to pinpoint what's going to work and what's going wrong in these industries, to bring a fresh perspective for the policy and regulations, and to raise awareness in general. So all of this, if you link it, of course, again, with the environmental, like CO2, like water, like land use, like particles, like microplastics. So if you link all of that, and then it will be very easy to mix and match with the SDG goals, because the UN sustainability and development goals are very nice and neat framework where you can link those activities to those particular SDG goals, and then you are aligned with this international strategy of how I can do this activity or task in my little company to align with what's internationally happening about fair jobs, about responsible consumer and responsible production, about a more equitable world, about more proper climate or water quality or drinking rights, drinking water rights. So all of this can be translated, if you will, to make it more tangible and link it to those SDG goals.
Yeah. And I think because we talked about it a lot from the perspective of smaller companies, maybe innovative companies, a lot of it is also true for the large corporates of this world, because the investor side is also transforming. Maybe based on your experiences and from your viewpoint, from seeing this in an innovative and an impact-driven smaller company, what are the things that you would say are the most translatable for any kind of scenario?
Yeah, because in the impact-driven startups, and we had the pleasure to meet a lot of them in our ways through different accelerator programs. Some of them are more focused on social, others are more focused on environmental. I think the bedrock will start by governance. And it's very important to, you mentioned earlier, the Slick team. Behind the Slick team that we have are bright minds, and it was really cherry picked, because without a great team that share the same value, walks toward the same vision, we cannot do anything. So this is very important. It's the bedrock to do a very ethical and transparent and equitable governance where you can have a direct, quick control on. And then depending to your type of activity, you can go between social and environmental. So some companies, they don't have anything related to environment, but raising awareness and equipping the society with some fairness. For example, there are companies that are working for women education. We know that if women are more educated, you will have more sustainability outcome. Or if there's women more in boards, you will have more sustainability targets reached for that company. In that sense, because women are responsible for a lot of purchasing decisions in households. So then if you educate that part of the society, then eventually in indirectly you will have an impact on the environment. So it depends on the type of activity, but you really need to take a really eagle view on your activity and what you can do, and try to translate those activities under your direct control and under your indirect control. But I would like to go back to the investor story, because this is a very important point you raised. And like a lot of investors, impact investors, it's clear they have this also clear in their DNA, that they want to invest in impact driven companies. Other classical investors, traditional, I would say, VCs, they are start to look into that, because they should look into that from a risk management perspective. If I take textile industry, but this applies for any other industry. If I take textile industry, it's an international industry, ramified. It has a footprint that is existing all over the world. Your jeans probably go around the globe a couple of times before it arrives to your closet. So it's very important to understand where things happen in the supply chain, in the value chain. So a lot of material resources and production happen in Far East Asia. Far East Asia in the last 5 years is battered by floods and heat waves. That is putting this industry at risk, let alone the geopolitical risks. But just if we think about the climate impact on those activities, that put the whole industry at risk. So if you don't de-risk the climate and look for a climate solutions to safeguard these businesses, then you are doing a shortcoming for the future of the successful and sustainable business, just as a monetary sustainable business.
Yeah. And I think you raised something very important here, because in the end, the investor side looks at it from an ROI perspective, and whether or not the climate change, for instance, has a negative effect on your financial situation is, I think, also heavily dependent on the time scope that you look at, right? So if we get investors to look maybe a bit more into the future and calculate those future risks into their portfolios, then automatically there needs to be more investment into truly impactful companies.
Exactly, for de-risking their portfolios.
All right. I mean, Rawaa, we're already at 32 minutes or so. I could go on for quite a while. And I have to say, I'm really proud, because you're a member of the Sustainability Circle. And with you, there are a lot of others that also share this viewpoint of wanting to be really impactful and striving for impact rather than just clearing some sort of a regulatory bar. And I think this is exactly what we need in the community of corporate sustainability. And maybe to give it back to you, is there a final thing that the listeners should take from this?
I think that as individuals, as citizens, we need to reflect on our day-to-day activity, because each and every one of us can play an important role. It can has a ripple effect around our communities, and then the way we carry our careers and our businesses. So please give it a very hard look and de-risk your future and the future of the coming generation.